and well and needs to be discussed in more detail. We have already talked about this topic once before, but we felt it necessary to bring it back because we're giving a slightly different approach while still echoing some of the things that we already said before. It's also important to note that the first time we gave this particular topic, you can correct me if I'm wrong, Comrade Ajamu, but I believe it was during our lockdown. And so it's important to understand that, this work, it continues on, not just a global pandemic, but also, we're going to continue to see how propaganda and capitalist media, capitalist empires, they're going to always work overtime in crafting a specific narrative that makes African people look bad, that criminalizes us, that makes us look like we are villains and we are thieves and things of that nature. And so we need to understand what we're up against. And we also need to understand the importance and the power of finding a way to create a different narrative that expresses just how revolutionary the Watts Rebellion can be and other urban rebellions if we are to learn from them and to use strategies, techniques, lessons learned that came from those situations so that we can apply them and moving forward in a better direction, in a more organized direction, right? So, we can understand that when we think about their story versus our story, we have to understand that it's rooted in this basic ideology that the capitalist system will use any type of mass media, because remember, they have full control over how the messages are sent out, how the messages are crafted, and so they'll use those media systems, they'll use them to communicate. And the way they communicate these messages, now propaganda is pumping and pushing these messages out. You can hear commercials on your music selection if you have a streaming service for music. If you stream television shows, you can see the commercials there. You may hear the commercials on the radio if you still listen to the radio in a vehicle or on a boombox or something of that. You may see billboards when you're out in the city or out in public or whatnot. You may even see campaigns in other areas. You may see actual people verbalizing this propaganda, but the propaganda states that urban rebellions are considered and classified by Lyndon Johnson in 1968 as unacceptable. And what we're here to remind you all of today is that it's so interesting if you know the background of what happened, which is so critical and ties in why joining an organization that's working for justice and increasing your political education is going to be so important, because if you don't know what has happened over time, then you won't be able to bring up examples and start to spot the contradictions. And it's so important to be able to do that because, excuse me, if you're able to do that, then you can see the inconsistencies of capitalism. And if you can see the inconsistencies of capitalism, then you might be in a better position to see how untrustworthy the system really is, right? So I think it's so important that we understand that, Lyndon B. Johnson spoke about urban rebellions being unacceptable. So I guess my question would be, so when we stole the indigenous people's land of the Western Hemisphere, well, excuse me, not we, when the indigenous people's land was stolen, was that acceptable? Now that Occupy Palestine has been completely more propagandized to where people are not in a position of understanding that it is occupied Palestine. It's always been occupied Palestine because it is the Palestinians' land. But was any of that acceptable? The mass murders that have taken place with both indigenous people and Palestinians, was that acceptable? Has it been acceptable that African people are struggling everywhere to maintain a status income and a stable income to where the unhoused rates represent that Africans are some of the highest unhoused people in the world? Is that acceptable? Is it acceptable that African people are not in a position where we can label our children and be able to live through that experience and see these children grow up? Is that acceptable? Right. And so I guess the question becomes, well, what is deemed as acceptable and what's not deemed as acceptable? Because if you ask me, under capitalism, of course you're going to say it's unacceptable for someone to practice an urban rebellion because your objective is to maintain control. Your objective is to keep people in line. Your objective is to focus on making sure that each and every individual is putting all their energy, all their talents, all their focus, all their resources into promoting and maintaining the capitalist system. That should be our number one objective as people. That should be our number one objective. So when we start to push against that and we start to organize against that, that becomes a problem for capitalism because now we're disrupting the system. Now we're decentering the system and we're not continuing on with the progression that is supposed to take place. And so, we can think more about that and understand that when we consider what a protest looks like, this same system that we live under that considers it to be acceptable that humanity is dying, that considers it acceptable that humanity can't afford food for their families, that considers it acceptable that the inequities are acceptable, whether it be under education, economics, unemployment, if we're talking about health disparities, like the list goes on and on. But all of that is acceptable. What's not acceptable is to do urban rebellions, right? So when we start to think more about the oppressor and how they're defining these things, what we'll come to understand is that they would want us to believe that by protesting, and I'm talking about any form of protesting, if it is outside of the capitalist benefit. So if you're protesting in a way that does not benefit capitalism, then you might as well be considered a criminal. You might as well be considered unpatriotic. You might as well be considered that you are, a martyr and that you're not interested in doing what is best for the people here. But capitalism is not interested in doing what's best for the people. So it's interesting to me that you would say to people who are protesting against something that they are doing something wrong, that they should be punished, that they should be criminalized, but you've been stealing people's land for many, many years. You've been oppressing Irish people for over 1,000 years, Britain. That's acceptable. That's okay for you to keep doing that. You've been killing people. You've been raping people. You've been colonizing people. All of these things have taken place. But because people are starting to organize against that, I shouldn't say start because people have been resisting. We have been organizing against it. But because people are continuing to organize against it, you have a problem and now we should be criminalized. I need us to really understand the contradiction of that, you all. We have to really kind of look at that and unpack that. And by the same token, it's not an accident that most of the public entities that we utilize in this world, be they social parks, public parks that we take our children to or go jogging or running or whatever, they might even be dog parks, they might be playgrounds, they might be libraries, they might be educational institutions such as primary education, schools for young children, middle schools. These institutions, institutions, but also these places, these parks, they are typically named after people who promote capitalism. And we've already given seminars about that. So we're not going to go into strong detail about that tonight. But I do think it's important to highlight that this is all designed to perpetuate, to promote, and to protect capitalism. There's your alliteration for the evening. It is all designed to perpetuate, promote, and protect capitalism. And so this is why you have buildings, you have children who are going to school where the school is named after a very famous colonizer who murdered thousands of indigenous people. This is why you go to a park and it's named after someone who completely annihilated a group of people and also was extremely unkind to non-male people in that process, right? Like we have all of these situations in all the places that we live in the world. And so when we think more about that, we have to think about like what is happening where the world we live in celebrates and honors and respects people who promote, protect, and idolize capitalism instead of people who are actually resisting against it. And then you can couple today's seminar with the seminar we did last weekend, where we should be thinking about people who are pushing against the system because they are actually making a difference instead of the people who just promote capitalism and benefit from it. I continue to think about how the statue of James Marion Sims in New York was recently considered to be taken down. But the point is, he had a statue created. And if you don't know who Marion Sims is, you should definitely do your research, because as an African person who can labor children, I am disgusted to know that this man had a statue, but he's celebrated. He's considered the father of gynecology, right? So that's the world we live in, though, you all. That's those kind of people are celebrated because they have done such a great job, and capitalism is so proud of them. And so that's what we have to think about more. And we also have to understand our power as oppressed people. We know that oppressed people have the right to use any, and I do mean any, method whatsoever to help alleviate our oppression. We deserve to be sick and tired of being sick and tired, as our comrade Sojourner said. We deserve to be in a space where we are fed up. We deserve to be in a space where we no longer want to be disrespected. We deserve to be in a space where we are done, where we do not want to take any more suffering. And more importantly, we don't want our children to suffer anymore. These could be children that are already alive, or we could be fighting for a better future for children who have not yet been born. It doesn't matter. We're done. We're tired of the oppression, and we are not interested in living that life anymore. And so that means that if we understand that, we have every right to use whatever we have available to us, and even resources that we can make available to us. We have every right to use those to alleviate that oppression. And, to quote Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., he said that, quote, rebellions are the voice of the unheard, unquote. So just thinking more about that, I would encourage us, we would encourage you all to really think more about who is releasing this ideology that urban rebellions are bad, especially if we've been conditioned, propaganda, if we've been conditioned to think about the fact that if we were to participate in an urban rebellion, organizing one, starting one, creating one, whatever, we would be considered and deemed as criminalized. But who's to say that that's a bad thing to do that? Again, anything that's opposite of promoting capitalism, we should be celebrating, promoting, and we should be multiplying those actions. And then anything that promotes capitalism, we should be questioning it. And we should be really trying to think, is there a reason why we're still doing this? Maybe we should shift how we're doing this because we don't want to promote capitalism. That's the same system that dehumanizes us every single day. Next slide, please. Speaking of capitalism, it's also important for us to quote our comrade Malcolm X when he helped us to understand that under a capitalist society, they are going to use media to share messages with us, but we must be vigilant. We must pay attention. We must be suspicious. We must be very much aware of the fact that how the messages are crafted are going to change, because when you are so good at telling a lie, like capitalism has done for so many years, you have to keep changing the lie because it's not the truth. So, because it's not the truth, you have to keep adding things to it because you may not remember what you said before. And so, because of it, now people are starting to receive different statements that are all based on supporting this lie that was said originally, when in actuality, if we paid a little bit better attention, we would notice the inconsistencies much faster. And we should be confident, and we should be aware of the fact that we're noticing those inconsistencies. We shouldn't make excuses for capitalism. When we notice the inconsistencies, we should highlight it, and we should be very much upset and disturbed that it is taking place. I was so privileged to have brunch with a friend of mine that I had not seen in a really long time. It had been like 2 or 3 years since she and I saw each other. And we met last weekend. And, we sat down at the restaurant and she said, how are you doing? And I said, I'm doing okay, capitalism. And I shrugged my shoulders. And she laughed. And I was like, "How are you doing?" And she was like, "Girl, capitalism." And I laughed. And I just love that she and I have that friendship. And then, like 5 seconds later, I was like, well, patriarchy. And she was like, well, xenophobia. And I was like, yes, all the things. Yes. And so I'm just saying, like, to be able to normalize calling out the BS, that is going to be key for us if we want to change and save our future. We have got to normalize calling out the BS. We have got to normalize calling out the fact that this system is not a righteous system. We have got to normalize that. We have got to normalize being honest about the fact that this is a messed up system. It's an inhumane system. It's an unethical system. This system is gross and disgusting for how it has managed to treat people and how we have allowed it to treat us. That is disgusting. Excuse me. And we should put our foots down because we should be ashamed that we have allowed it to come to this. So we should feel confident. We should feel mobilized and revolutionized to understand we have everything we need. We don't have to accept this. We deserve better. We don't have to accept this. We deserve better. And so just going back to the media piece, it's so critical that we really look at the language that's being said here, right? So, during World War II, capitalism was so eloquent and how they shared the message. So they shared, Russia is a friend of the US. What we need to be worried about is Germany and Japan. Those are our enemies, right? Okay, well, now we're thinking about that. And I'm saying our, but I don't identify with the US. So the narrative was that Germany and Japan were enemies of the US, right? Okay, but then after World War II, so again, Russia is a friend, Germany and Japan were the enemies. After the war was over, the same capitalist media convinced everyone that Russia was now the enemy and Germany and Japan were the friends. Those were the allies that the US could rely on. And so, like, that's what I mean when I say we got to look at the critic. We have to be critical, you all. We have to pay attention. We have to look at what's being presented to us, and we have to fish and scan and skim through it to see what are the inequalities? What are the inequities? What are the gaps? What are the inconsistencies? We got to take what we saw last Tuesday and compare it to what we have Thursday. And we need to be very critical in how information is being shared. We need to be honest about the fact that capitalism is not a just system, which means 9 times out of 10, the information you're receiving is not information that is going to be rooted in helping humanity to do what they need to do. It is not going to be rooted in that. And so just understanding that a little bit more, we can start to understand how everyone's lives are made and impacted by capitalism. And really, you can make the argument that every single thing that is wrong in this world, capitalism has something to do with it. Every single thing that's wrong in this world. And I'm talking about poverty. I'm talking about systems of oppression. I'm talking about genocide. I'm talking about gender-based violence. I'm talking about those things, but I'm also talking about not being able to afford food consistently. I'm talking about financial insecurity. I'm talking about people who are jumping job to job and living paycheck to paycheck because they don't know where their next meal is going to come from. I'm talking about anything that causes people to experience anguish and pain, whether they are unhoused, whether they are housed, whether they are in abusive relationships, whether their children are not respecting them, or whether their children are hospitalized because they're sick right now and they can't afford the medical bills. Every single thing that I just mentioned is tied back to capitalism. And if you yourself don't make enough money, you are going to be impacted by capitalism in a negative way. If you do make enough money, you're still going to be impacted, but you'll be able to sleep better at night because you have classism on your side and you're in a higher class bracket. So you benefit from that. But the overwhelming majority of us are not going to be able to sleep well. As a matter of fact, that's what keeps us up at night, worrying about paying our bills, trying to figure out how we're going to get to the next level, how we're going to do this, how are we going to be able to pay this and still make sure that so and so has food to eat, right? And so just understanding that, we can think about how Again, the media is kind of shifting the message to share what they want us to know, which is why we need to have higher political education. And joining an organization that's working for justice will allow us to start to notice those inequalities. It'll start to help us notice those inconsistencies. The other thing we want to think about is urban rebellions. Why do they happen? Well, they happen because people are striking out against enemies. They are striking out against people who mean us harm. People with urban rebellions are fighting back and striking out against people who we consider to be enemies who don't even live in our communities. So that means that the people that we are striking out against, there's this assumption that those are usually the property owners that we're facing. And that's not even based on truth and realism. So again, like, the media is painting a picture for you to help you think of it one way, but that's not at all what's based on truth. It's not at all what's based on reality. It's just something that can be manipulated. And if you're not intelligent enough with your political education background to compare and contrast, you're not going to be able to see the inconsistency. And therefore, you're going to accept everything that capitalism brings to you. You're not going to be critical. You're not going to challenge anything. And then how are you going to grow? How are you going to fight back? How are you going to defend yourself ideologically from capitalism? Which means then how are you going to defend yourself physically? Because the system has you locked up. They have you in a corner. You have nowhere to go. But if you do increase your political education, if you do decide to join an organization that's working for justice, where you can get more PE, political education, then you can start to train yourself because it is a muscle that needs to be developed. You can start to train yourself how to think more critically. You can start to train yourself on how to assess information. And 9 times out of 10, you'll be able to draw the connections back to capitalism. I remember I had a friend a long time ago, and I was at her house and she was making a sandwich for her kid. And she said, oh, dang, I don't have any peanut butter. Well, who was supposed to go get some more peanut butter? I can't even make this peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And I laughed and I said, you know, that's capitalism's fault. It's not a specific person in your household who should have gotten peanut butter. It's always related back to capitalism. And she said, what do you mean? And I said, well, whoever it was that was supposed to get peanut butter, they may have tried to go to the store, but the store may have sold out because so many other people had a higher demand of needing peanut butter, and therefore you weren't able to get it for your family. Or maybe you didn't go on the right day, or maybe you didn't have money because you had to wait until payday. Most of us can testify to that because that's real life. You know what I'm saying? So my point is, she hadn't even thought of it. And I said to her, even how peanuts are grown today is based on capitalism. And a lot of people can't afford peanuts because they're too expensive based on the drought. Well, whose fault is the drought? Capitalism. Whose fault is climate change? Capitalism. You know what I'm saying? So just understanding all of this, I think, is really, really important, you all. And like I said, it's not just enough to understand that how we think of media is controlled by capitalism, but also how we treat one another, capitalistic ideologies, how we understand the world and experience the world, capitalist ideologies. So why would the perception of urban rebellions be any different? That also is rooted and driven by how capitalism has defined it. So it's up to us to join an organization that's working for justice, or at least support a Pan-Africanist organization that's working for justice, so that we can help get a new rhetorical lens out there. Okay.
Ashe Obrigada. Thank you, Asante Sana. Just two quick clarifications, Shakur. First, it was Miss Fannie Lou Hamer that said, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired, not Sojourner Truth. So that was Miss Fannie Lou Hamer that made that statement. And then second, just before I move from this slide, these are quotes that Malcolm X made in 1964. So I just want to make sure people understand the context of which he was making these comments. The first one you explained well, like he was talking about how the capitalist media manipulates us into thinking whatever they want us to think about it. You explained that clearly. The second part, though, what Malcolm is saying there about urban rebellions and us striking out against our enemies, what he's saying is that because the people, every time there's an urban rebellion, people always say the same thing. Well, why are they tearing up their own neighborhoods? And what Malcolm was saying is that they're not really our neighborhoods. We don't own anything in the neighborhood. So when people go out and they burn down stores, they're doing that to strike out against the enemies who are the class of people who own stores in poor neighborhoods, which is not us. So just clarifying, that's what he meant when he made that statement. And just continuing on, we just want to talk about the concept of urban rebellions, and we want to expand it beyond just the question of the backward ass United Snakes of America, because it's important for us as African people to recognize that our people engage in urban rebellions all over the planet Earth. We do this. We do it in this backward cesspool country. We've done it in Canada. We do it all over Europe. They've happened in Germany, France, Britain, Belgium. We do them all over Central and South America. We even do them throughout the African continent. So it's important for us to understand why these are happening. And you should, if you don't, know some of this history, that's why we have the book on the screen, A History of Pan-African Revolt by C.L.R. James, a very outstanding book. Because what it does is it gives you an understanding of first why the transatlantic slave trade ended, because Africans were rebelling and the system of slavery was untenable. Now, again, I just don't mean here in the backward ass US. This was true everywhere in the Caribbean, South America, Central America. This was the case. And so we're saying, as Kwame Ture said to us, that African people have burned these capitalist societies from plantations to cities. We've burned these societies from plantations to cities. And what he's saying there is that for hundreds of years, African people have rose up and engaged in rebellion against the capitalist system. And that's important to note because no other people have that record the way we do, of rising up in mass all over the world against the capitalist system and burning down its cities. No other people have done that. And I'm not making a statement that, we're more conscious than any other people. If that were true, we would be free. But the reason why this has happened the way it's happened, you have to understand the relationship of Africa to the capitalist world. Because it was Africa that supplied the transatlantic slave trade, and it was the transatlantic slave trade that created the seed money for industrialization. And it was industrialization that created the capitalist system. The transfer from human hand labor to machines, mechanized production. The money that fueled this transformation was created through profits created from the transatlantic slave trade, the enslavement of African people all throughout the Western Hemisphere. And the wealth that the capitalist countries have today, all of their systems of industry were started. The banking industry, the insurance industry, all of these backward systems were started by exploiting money produced from the transatlantic slave trade. And the system of colonizing Africa put these European powers in a position to create a mechanized system of exploiting African resources, which still exists today. That's why you're looking at the Olympics in Paris, France, and they're showing you that goddamn Eiffel Tower. And every night they light up that goddamn tower, and the uranium used to light that damn tower is coming from the African country of Niger. 1 in 3 houses in Paris are lit by uranium transferred to electricity that comes from the country of Niger. Meanwhile, our people in Niger can't even depend on electricity from minute to minute. This is the system that colonialism and slavery set in place. And that is why all over the world, the capitalist system brutally exploits the African masses, because they have to make sure they have us under control, because their entire wealth and the maintenance of their capitalist system depends on continuing to exploit Africa. So that is the reason, friends, enemies, why Kwame Ture was 100% correct when he talked about us, no other people, but African people, burning these societies from plantations to cities. And this is important because we have to understand that these rebellions, as I mentioned, have happened all over the world. Police were created because of this reality that I just talked about. They have to ensure that the African masses are kept under control. Now, they have to ensure a whole lot of people. Obviously, they have to ensure the Palestinian people are kept under control. They have to ensure that the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere are kept under control. But their wealth they derive from Africa. So what I'm saying is that we're all in the same position as oppressed people. But what I'm saying here is that from a scientific standpoint, these capitalists have prioritized ensuring that they can maintain their exploitation of Africa. And one of the ways they have to be able to do that is to keep the African masses brutally oppressed and confused about who the hell we are. Because as long as we think that we're French, long as we think that we're German, long as we think that we're Brazilian, long as we think that we're Dominican, long as we think that we're Nigerian, long as we think that we're American, long as we think that we're Canadian, we will never make the connection that the key to our liberation and our forward progress is recognizing that these people are stealing everything from our mother and building and maintaining their wealth off of it, while the best that we have is to beg them for a goddamn job. And that is how this whole process works. So this is why they keep us so brutally exploited. And that's the reason why within the last 5 years, our people have rose up in urban rebellions in London, England, rose up in urban rebellions in Paris, France, rose up in urban rebellions in Hamburg, Germany, rose up in urban rebellions in areas in Canada, in areas in the United States of America, in Brazil. This is the reason why this happens, because their intention is to make sure we stay brutally oppressed and we don't recognize who we are. That's why if you scroll on any social media reels, you'll see all these Europeans telling us, or matter of fact, I suggest you engage in an experiment. Go on social media where there's a discussion about what identity we are as African people. It can be any type of discussion related to that concept. And I guarantee you, if you get on there and you make a comment and you say, well, we're African people, no matter where we are on the planet Earth, just something as simple as that, you'll see so many people come out, a lot of them Europeans, come out to refute you, argue you, push you down. And a lot of these trained Negroes, these graham cracker Negroes, they'll come on there too. I ain't no African. I love my slave master because he might give me some money if I say that. So I'm going to continue to say it. So that's what you'll get, because this system is reliant on keeping us confused. And they know that the minute that we're not confused and we know who we are, that their days are numbered. And so this is why all of this happens the way it happens. And now the simplistic answer is, well, it's because of anti-Blackness. That's why they did. No, there's no anti-Blackness. There's an anti-Africa and a necessity for capitalism to exploit Africa. If there was no Africa, there wouldn't be any concept of anti-Blackness, because all these Europeans are at the beach right now trying to get darker than us. And they would just exterminate us if we were just being their way. But it's the point of they need African resources. And so in order for them to continue to do that, they know we're not, even though we act stupid, they know we're not as stupid as we appear sometimes. And many of us are waking up, and as we continue to do our work, more and more of us will wake up. And so they know, even if we don't, that it's just a matter of time before we wake up. And so they have to ensure their systems are in place to ensure that they have control over us. And so now, so that's being said, urban rebellions are a part of our experience as oppressed people under capitalism. So, years ago, after the LA rebellion in 1992, Oprah Winfrey took her ass to LA to do one of her shows. You can look at it on YouTube. And she was asking, an audience was filled with African people that lived in South LA where the rebellion happened. And she, arrogant, representative mouthpiece for the capitalist system. She's arrogantly asking the young African there in the audience, well, what did this get you tearing up the city like it did? And he looked at her, grabbed the microphone and said, it got you here. So it's important for us to, and everybody clapped because that's a valid point. And all she could do is go to the next person because she's too stupid to, she couldn't respond. There's no response. So this is important for us to realize that I praise that African that said that because that's an African that's thinking for themselves and not just reacting to the stimuli from the capitalist system. So a slave has every right and responsibility to rebel. We should be rebelling. That's exactly what we're supposed to do. It's something the hell wrong with us if we sit here like, we can't rebel. Not this good white man. We need to protect his system. So that is a clear statement we're making, is that we are not, you came to the wrong place if you want somebody to condemn urban rebellions. Urban rebellions are legitimate expressions of our resistance against oppression. No question about that. But urban rebellions are not revolution. They are not revolution. And that's important to make a difference between the two because a lot of us are confused. We think urban rebellion is revolution. And because we might have lived in LA or New York or somewhere where it happened and we didn't like the feeling we have, then we're against revolution. And we don't know a damn thing about revolution. Urban rebellion is not revolution. Urban rebellions are typically spontaneous eruptions. These Gestapo police kill one of our people, and we rise up and we tear the city down because we're sick of them killing us. We didn't plan it. Nobody had a meeting and said, okay, we're going to tear this building down and burn this building. Nobody did that. The people participated don't even know each other. They didn't even know they were going to be out there. 24 hours before they were out there, they had no idea they were going to be doing that. It's totally spontaneous. It's an expression of our anger at the oppression that we experience. That's what urban rebellions are. Whether they're in Germany, in German, whether they're in France and French, whether they're in Cordoba, in Africa and West Africa, it doesn't matter. They're expressions of the people's being sick of being exploited and oppressed. But that is not revolution. Revolution is a planned and organized process that involves the entire society. Millions of people are involved in organization of revolution. So, for example, we have the picture of the doctors from the Cuban Revolution. And if you look at how the Cuban society, its socialist society is constructed, they have organization happening all throughout that country. The youth have organizations to organize them for the revolution. Elders have organizations to organize them for the revolution. Students have organizations to organize them for the revolution. Women, LGBTQ folks, everybody has organizations to organize them for the Cuban Revolution. And then they have the committees in defense of the revolution to organize the neighborhoods. Everything is organized on all levels of the Cuban Revolution. That's how revolution happens. Whereas here in this backward cesspool, you're not organized into no organization. You only have organizations from the capitalist system that organize you. The Internal Revenue Service, they organize you. Send me your money each year, ho, or else I'm going to make your life miserable. You have the police that organize you. Do what we want you to do, or we're going to make your lives miserable. You have all of the social organizations that organize you. Don't build this there, don't do that there, or else we're going to make your life miserable. But you have no organizations in these capitalist societies that are designed to help you organize for your own benefit. Nothing like that exists. And that's because this is not a revolutionary society. These capitalist societies are built and maintained on exploitation. So in revolutionary societies, you always have organizations because the process to transform a society, which is exactly what revolution means, takes time. It takes generations. It's not something that happens overnight. It's not an event. It's a process. And so that's the reason why the Cuban Revolution, they don't say, well, on January 1st, 1959, we had our revolution. They tell you on August 11th, 2024, we are building our revolution, because they recognize what I just said. It's not an event, it's a process. In urban rebellion, as Kwame Ture talked about, we rise up after so many years of oppression, burn a city down and sit down for 30 years. Till the next time we rise up and burn it up. There's no sustainable organization involved in that. You know, they send in their National Guard or whatever the military is in whatever country it's happening, and it squashes the rebellion, and then we sit down until the next time we get outraged. That's not revolution. Revolution is planned and organized, as I mentioned. But that doesn't take away anything from urban rebellions, because the value of urban rebellions is they show us our potential. Look, if you look at any of them that have happened, in one day, we essentially take over an entire city. You look at the one in 92 in LA, for example. You had 3 days of urban rebellion. Los Angeles has a population of over 4 million people. And they have 35,000 police in Los Angeles. It's the largest police force in the United States of America. And in just a few hours, disorganized Africans put that entire city in a state of disarray. With all those resources, and Daryl Gates, and all that racism, and all those SWAT teams, and all that BS they have to keep us oppressed, in a few hours, our people had control of that city. If we were a little better organized, we could have probably taken control of the city with no organization and no planning. Imagine if we had revolutionary organization and planning, what we could do. And that urban rebellion was just a few hundred people. We're not even talking about the millions of organized people that are involved in revolutionary process. So you should be able to see that difference. But even with that level of disorganization, we still were able to push the capitalist system. When Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated by the US government in 1968, there were over 300 cities that erupted in urban rebellions. The capitalist system was shaking in its boots, you all. All of this was disorganized by our people. But even still, they were shaking in their boots. They got together because they thought that our system it could be overthrown. They got together. Richard Nixon got together with McGeorge Bundy, who was chair of one of those Chevron or Ford Foundation. I can't remember which one right now. And all these other capitalists, David Rockefeller, they all got together. And they had a strategy because they read the Kerner report. We haven't read it, but our enemies read about what's happening to us. And the Kerner report said that there are two Americas, one white, one black. And if something wasn't done to correct that problem, it would lead to massive social upheaval. And so these crackers got together, read that report, and they said, we need to create a program to create a black, quote unquote, middle class. And from that emerged the concept of affirmative action, contract set-asides, entrance into college, special admissions into college, all of that. All of that came from the fact of those Africans that you look down your nose at who got out in the street and tore this goddamn country apart. These crackers got together and said, we need to do something, because they understood that if they create an African petty bourgeoisie class, that class would do what petty bourgeoisie classes are designed to do, which is be the middle managers for the capitalist system. They didn't have that before. So they created a system of affirmative action that created that petty bourgeoisie class. We had a small petty bourgeoisie class, but in the 1960s, it proliferated significantly. And so now you had all these, like most people my age were the first Africans in their families to go to college. That's the reason why, because we now had the opportunity to do that. And fast forward 60 years later to today, and all of these Negroes in this petty bourgeoisie class. You see them. They're all in front of you, all these celebrities. They have had all these opportunities. They made all this money, and they talk like damn fools. Well, slavery might not have been that bad. Well, they've achieved their objective. They've created a class of African people to represent their interests, and that's what they did. But that doesn't take away from the point that urban rebellions push the system to make reforms for us. But it just goes to show you that reforms will never solve our problem. And so if we look at the question of organization versus mobilization, spontaneous, disorganized, and with very limited planning, in the US alone, if you just use the US as an example, we carried out over 300 urban rebellions in 1968 alone. And I just told you the story of how these capitalists got together to represent affirmative action as a weak and ineffective compromise to our oppression. But the point that you hopefully can leave here with is imagine what we can accomplish. You got a college degree, or at least had the opportunity to go to college. You know many people that have it. You got all these Africans that have these positions within the capitalist system. But imagine what we can accomplish with revolutionary planning and organization. Instead of a few Negroes having resources, we could open up resources for the masses of our people and improve their conditions. This is what revolution represents. So if you want a way to look at it, urban rebellions can give you a glimpse into what we could achieve if we get united. Revolution gives you a vision for how we can create an end to our oppression and a society that advances us and helps us make a contribution to all the other movements around the world that are advancing as they make their contribution to ours, and we build a better world. That's what we're talking about. But that creates a much larger vision than what you're going to get from capitalist system media, from capitalist social media. You're never going to get that vision from them. They're going to do everything they can to prevent you from seeing what we're talking about here today. So just remember, if forced, the capitalist system will create reforms like affirmative action. It'll do that. But it'll never change without an organized revolution to force that change. So if we really want a change to the oppression, if that's really what we're talking about, and we have to say that because some of us are just talking about building a niche space within capitalism that's comfortable for us despite the oppression against our people and humanity. Some of us, that's what we're talking about. Some of us are talking about, well, this is an oppressive system, but I want to try to see how I can get as much of a payday out of this oppressive system as I can. Some of us, even many of us, articulating so-called pro-Black rhetoric. That's really what we're fighting for, is, as the late Geronimo G. Jaga said, there's plenty of Black power pimps out here. And you got to be politically sophisticated enough to know the difference. We're talking about revolution, where it's not never about benefiting individually. It's about the collective advancement of the masses of our people. And anybody that's not talking about that is talking about some individualistic advancement for themselves within the capitalist system. And as far as we're concerned, they're no better than the European capitalists who control this system, because all they're trying to do is become a part of it. And that ain't where we're trying to be. So we thank you for joining us today. We invite you back next week, August 18th. We're going to talk about the contributions of Marcus Mosiah Garvey, commemorating his born day, which is August 17th. And on that note, for those of you in Northern California, we want to definitely invite you out. We're having a Black August and Pan-African Women's Day event commemoration that Saturday, August 17th, the actual born day of Marcus Mosiah Garvey. You see the flyer there, 3 to 5 p.m. in McClatchy Park at 5th and 33rd here in Sacramento. You're going to want to look for the red, black, and green flag. You'll see it. And we'll have food available. We'll have a wonderful program, uplifting, talking about these revolutionary institutions, Black August and Pan-African Women's Day. So please tell your friends, tell your enemies. They already know because they're better organized than we are. But tell your friends, tell your family and plan to come out. Even if you don't live around here, think about people you know in this area and tell them to come out. What do you have to lose by doing that? Help us do the work. That's a good thing to do. So that's next Saturday. And then if you want to go to the QR code in the upper left-hand corner, you can access a lot of valuable information. This is only one of many programs we do regularly within the APRP. So if you want to know some of the other ones, go in that QR code and they're listed there. And then you can also find access to the Forward Ever Shop, which is our store in the All African People's Revolutionary Party. You can buy clothing that has revolutionary Pan-African messages. Please support the Forward Ever Shop. Please support revolutionary Pan-African organization. If we don't do it, I don't know who we think is going to do it. So don't just be that person that says, well, I already bought a hoodie. Buy some more. You know, you don't go to Safeway once or wherever a store is in your area, Target or Walmart. You don't go there once and say, well, I already went to Walmart 10 years ago, so I don't need any more groceries. You continue to support our enemies. So have the same spirit towards our organizations fighting for our liberation. And if you have all the clothing, then talk to people that don't or buy it for them as gifts. And then go to www.aprp-intl.org, join the All African People's Revolutionary Party, and find out information about our work. You're not going to see it on MSNBC and CNN and CIA networks. So a lot of you, I mean, some people, we're just so crazy out here. Well, I've never heard of you. Well, what are you doing that you would hear about us? You stay in your house looking at TV. Of course, you don't know, you haven't heard about anything except what they want you to hear about. That's all you know. Contribute to the APRP. You can do it at Venmo at A-APRP and at PayPal at AAPRP. And then also, you know, one of our many projects on the ground in Africa that is all about bringing about this Pan-African unity that we are building is the Burkina Books program for the Thomas Sankara Center for Liberation and Pan-African Unity. The Thomas Sankara Center for Liberation and Pan-African Unity in Burkina Faso. Click on the bottom right QR code with your smartphone and become a monthly sponsor. You can sponsor whatever amount you can afford. But the point is that we're building revolutionary institutions in Burkina Faso to organize our people. And so we ask your help with that. And my book is there on the screen, A Guide for Organizing Defense Against White Supremacist, Patriarchal, and Fascist Violence, A Guide for Organizing Defense Against White Supremacist, Patriarchal, and Fascist Violence. Again, just like the Forward Ever Shop. I appreciate it if you bought a book, but tell people about it. Tell people, because it's a good book in terms of talking about how to organize in your communities, and you know we need that. And then also the proceeds we get, it's only $8, but the US dollars, the proceeds we use to finance the anti-fascist work that I've been participating in, and I'm trying to build that work. And I use the money I get from the book proceeds to do that. So I don't have to worry about paying my bills, you know? So help us out with that. Yeah, you can only buy it on Amazon, but you know, this is a capitalist system. We're using the enemy's resources to organize against the enemy. And I don't want to hear your critique of that unless you have a printing press I can use for free, unless you have shipping all over the world that I can use for free, timely, because with them, I'm able to do that. So unless you have that, I don't want to hear it. So thank you for joining us. Forward ever, backwards never. Enjoy the rest of your day.